They made me pay for the wedding I wasn't invited to because I apparently didn't fit their aesthetic vision. But when I walked into that reception hall as the new owner and watched their faces turn white as I announced the immediate cancellation of their dream wedding, suddenly their aesthetic didn't matter anymore. My name is Isabella Martinez, and this is how I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's buying the whole game board.
I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning I found out about my exclusion from Rachel's wedding wasn't through any dramatic confrontation or tearful phone call. It was through LinkedIn, of all places. My cousin had posted congratulations to Rachel and her fiancé Marcus, along with a photo from what was clearly an engagement celebration I knew nothing about. The image showed Rachel in a stunning emerald dress, surrounded by at least 30 people I recognized: aunts, uncles, college friends, even our neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who Rachel barely spoke to. Everyone was raising champagne glasses in what looked like an upscale restaurant in downtown Portland. I stared at my phone screen in my real estate office, the familiar hum of phones ringing and keyboards clicking suddenly feeling distant. 3 months had passed since Rachel had casually mentioned over Sunday dinner that she and Marcus were thinking about getting engaged sometime soon. She'd said it while passing the mashed potatoes, as if discussing weekend grocery shopping. There had been no mention of a celebration, no invitation to be part of the moment, nothing. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was discovering this through social media while sitting in the office of Martinez Properties, the commercial real estate firm I'd built from absolutely nothing over the past 8 years. The same business that had generated enough profit for me to write check after check for Rachel's various financial emergencies throughout college and her early career struggles. The same success that apparently wasn't impressive enough to warrant inclusion in her major life moments. I had always been the family's financial safety net, though nobody ever put it in those terms. When Rachel needed help with her student loan payments during her first year out of college, I covered 3 months' worth without hesitation. When she wanted to take that extensive marketing certification course that would totally transform her career, I paid the $4,000 fee up front. When she moved to her trendy apartment in the Pearl District and came up short on the security deposit, my bank account bridged the gap. But it wasn't just Rachel. When my parents decided to renovate their kitchen 2 years ago and discovered the project would cost twice their budget, they didn't call a contractor to scale back the plans, they called me. When my Uncle Tony's restaurant hit a rough patch during the pandemic and was facing closure, the family didn't organize a fundraiser or seek community support. They quietly asked if I could help out with a loan that we all knew would never be repaid. I had convinced myself this was simply what family did. Success came with responsibility, and my real estate investments had been incredibly profitable. I owned 4 commercial properties in prime Portland locations, had a growing client base, and had just closed the biggest deal of my career, a $2.3 million office complex sale that netted me a 6-figure commission. Money wasn't the issue. Being treated like an ATM with legs was becoming increasingly problematic. But the engagement celebration revelation was different. This wasn't about money or financial assistance. This was about being deliberately excluded from a moment that should have included me by default. Rachel and I had grown up sharing everything: clothes, secrets, dreams about our future weddings. We'd spent countless nights planning our hypothetical ceremonies, debating whether we'd be each other's maid of honor or if that was too predictable. I scrolled through more photos from the celebration, my stomach tightening with each image. There was Rachel's college roommate Jenny, who I'd met exactly twice. There was her coworker Amanda, who Rachel complained about constantly, calling her fake and totally superficial. There was even Marcus's mother, a woman who had made it crystal clear she disapproved of Rachel from day one, yet somehow merited inclusion in this intimate gathering. The guest list told a story, and I wasn't part of the narrative Rachel was constructing for her new life. I recognized the pattern now, the slow, subtle distancing that had been happening over the past 2 years. The invitations to family events that came with less advance notice, the conversations about her work and social life that had become increasingly surface level. The way she introduced me to new people in her circle with a brief, almost dismissive, "This is my sister Isabella," before quickly changing the subject. I had attributed it to natural growing apart, the kind of thing that happens when siblings establish their own lives and priorities. But looking at this celebration photo, surrounded by people who had somehow earned spots in her inner circle while I remained completely unaware the engagement had even happened, I realized this was something else entirely. This was intentional exclusion. My phone buzzed with a text notification. Rachel's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I felt a surge of hope. Maybe this was her reaching out to explain, to apologize for the oversight, to invite me to celebrate with her properly. "Hey Izzy, hope you're having a good week. Quick favor, Marcus and I found the most amazing wedding venue, but they need a deposit by Friday or we lose the date. Could you help us out? It's $8,000, but I promise we'll pay you back after the honeymoon. You're the best." I read the message 3 times, each reading making the situation clearer. She hadn't contacted me to share her joy or include me in her plans. She hadn't even mentioned that the engagement had already happened, that the celebration I'd missed had already taken place. She was reaching out because she needed money, and I was the person she called when financial requirements exceeded her means. The venue she was referring to was undoubtedly expensive and exclusive. Rachel had always had champagne tastes, even during her beer budget years. She gravitated toward brands, experiences, and locations that projected success and sophistication. Her Instagram was carefully curated with photos from upscale restaurants, boutique shopping trips, and weekend getaways to wine country. The wedding would be no different. It would be designed to impress, to create the perfect backdrop for the lifestyle she wanted to project. And apparently, I didn't fit that aesthetic. I set my phone down and stared out my office window at the bustling Portland street below. Food trucks were setting up for the lunch rush, office workers were grabbing coffee, construction crews were putting finishing touches on a new apartment complex I'd helped broker 6 months earlier. It was a scene of regular people working regular jobs, building something meaningful through consistent effort and genuine relationships. My success in commercial real estate hadn't come from connections or family money or playing politics in some corporate hierarchy. I'd earned every client through referrals, every deal through research and negotiation skills, every commission through long hours and attention to detail. I'd built relationships based on mutual respect and delivered results that spoke for themselves. But to Rachel, my achievements apparently weren't the right kind of impressive. They weren't glamorous or socially prestigious enough to warrant inclusion in her carefully orchestrated life events. I was useful when she needed financial backing, but not visible enough to be part of the celebration itself. The realization crystallized into something that felt like clarity mixed with disappointment. This wasn't about a forgotten invitation or poor communication. This was about being systematically relegated to the role of family ATM while being excluded from the family itself. Rachel wanted access to my resources without having to acknowledge my presence in her social circle. I picked up my phone and started typing a response, then deleted it. Started again, deleted again. What was the appropriate response to being asked for wedding venue money by someone who hadn't even told you they were engaged? How do you navigate being treated as a financial resource rather than a family member? The office around me continued its normal rhythm. Phones ringing, deals being negotiated, relationships being built on mutual respect and clear communication. Everything that seemed to be missing from my family dynamics was present in my professional life. The contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. I decided not to respond to Rachel's text immediately. Instead, I spent the afternoon researching the venue she was likely referring to. Portland had several high-end wedding locations that commanded $8,000 deposits, but only one had been featured prominently in local wedding magazines recently: the Cascade Manor, a restored 1920s estate overlooking the Willamette River. The venue boasted original hardwood floors, crystal chandeliers, and manicured gardens that had hosted Portland's elite for nearly a century. More importantly, the Cascade Manor was owned by Pemberton Holdings, a company I'd been tracking for months. They owned several commercial properties in the Portland metro area, and rumors had been circulating that they were looking to sell their entire portfolio to focus on developments in Seattle. The Manor wasn't just Rachel's dream venue. It was a potential business opportunity I'd been investigating long before her engagement celebration I wasn't invited to. That evening, I drove to my parents' house in Beaverton for what had become our traditional Wednesday family dinner. These gatherings had started as a way to maintain family connections as we all got busier with our respective lives, but they'd gradually evolved into something that felt more like obligation than enjoyment. My father would ask generic questions about work, my mother would update everyone on neighborhood gossip, and Rachel would monopolize most conversations with stories about her marketing firm's latest campaigns or her social activities. I arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, as always. My father was setting the table while my mother finished preparing her famous lasagna. Rachel's car wasn't in the driveway yet, which wasn't unusual. She often arrived 20 to 30 minutes late, claiming traffic or last-minute work emergencies. Isabella, perfect timing, my mother called from the kitchen. Could you help me carry these dishes to the dining room? As we arranged plates and silverware, my mother began her usual pre-dinner commentary about the neighbors, the weather, and various family members' recent activities. She mentioned that my cousin David had gotten a promotion at his accounting firm, that Aunt Maria was planning a cruise to Alaska, and that Mrs. Chen from down the street asked about my real estate business because her daughter was looking for commercial space. Oh, and Rachel has some exciting news to share tonight, she added casually, not looking up from arranging napkins. Really? I kept my voice neutral. What kind of news? I'll let her tell you herself, but let's just say we might be planning a very special celebration soon. The front door opened with Rachel's characteristic dramatic flair. Keys jangling, heels clicking against the hardwood, her voice carrying through the house as she called out her arrival. She appeared in the dining room wearing a designer dress I didn't recognize and a smile that seemed almost rehearsed. Sorry I'm late, everyone. Traffic was absolutely insane coming from downtown. She kissed my parents on the cheek and gave me a quick hug that felt more performative than affectionate. Something smells incredible, Mom.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. As we settled around the dinner table, Rachel's excitement was practically radiating from her. She kept glancing at Marcus, who had arrived shortly after her, and they were exchanging the kind of meaningful looks that suggested they were waiting for the right moment to make their announcement. So, my father said, cutting into his lasagna, Rachel mentioned she had some news to share with everyone. Rachel's face lit up, and she reached for Marcus's hand. Actually, yes, Marcus and I have something pretty amazing to tell you all. She paused for dramatic effect, clearly savoring the moment. We're engaged! My parents erupted in congratulations and excitement, jumping up to hug both Rachel and Marcus. My mother immediately started crying happy tears, and my father was shaking Marcus's hand vigorously while talking about welcoming him to the family officially. The dining room filled with the kind of genuine joy and celebration that should have included me naturally. But I already knew. I'd seen the photos, witnessed the celebration I wasn't part of, and received the venue deposit request. So while my family was experiencing this news for the first time, I was sitting there watching a performance of spontaneity that felt hollow and calculated. When did this happen? My mother asked, still dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. 3 days ago, Rachel said, extending her left hand to show off a princess-cut diamond ring that probably cost more than most people's cars. Marcus surprised me at Canlis with the most romantic proposal. He had them hide the ring in my dessert, and when I found it, he got down on one knee right there in the restaurant. Canlis, my father whistled appreciatively. That's not exactly a budget date night. Marcus laughed. Well, you only get engaged once, right? I wanted it to be perfect for Rachel. And then we had the most amazing celebration on Saturday, Rachel continued, her enthusiasm building. We invited our closest friends and family to Lee Pigeon for champagne and dinner. It was absolutely magical. I set down my fork carefully. That sounds wonderful. I'm surprised I didn't hear about it. The table went quiet for a moment. Rachel's smile faltered slightly, and my parents exchanged a quick glance that didn't go unnoticed. Oh, Rachel said, her voice taking on a slightly higher pitch that usually indicated she was about to deliver an explanation she'd rehearsed.
It was really last minute, and we kept the guest list super small, just immediate family and a few close friends. I see. I took a sip of water, letting the silence stretch. And the immediate family didn't include me? Well, you're always so busy with work, my mother interjected quickly. We didn't want to impose on your schedule with such short notice. My schedule? I looked around the table, noting how everyone was suddenly very interested in their lasagna. I've never been too busy for family celebrations. In fact, I don't think I've missed a single family event in the past 5 years. Rachel shifted uncomfortably in her chair. It really was just a spur-of-the-moment thing, Izzy. We literally threw it together in like 2 days. But you managed to coordinate schedules for 30 other people in 2 days? It wasn't 30 people, Rachel said defensively. It was maybe 15. The photo I saw on LinkedIn looked like more than 15. The admission that I'd seen evidence of the celebration hung in the air like smoke. Rachel's face flushed, and Marcus suddenly found his water glass fascinating. Look, my father said, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. What matters is that we're all here now, celebrating together as a family. Absolutely, my mother agreed quickly. And now we can start planning the wedding. This is so exciting. Rachel seized on this change of subject gratefully. Actually, we've already started looking at venues. We found this incredible place called the Cascade Manor. It's absolutely perfect, like something out of a fairy tale. That sounds expensive, my father said, with the kind of laugh that indicated he was already worried about costs. It is pretty pricey, Marcus admitted, but Rachel deserves the wedding of her dreams. We're hoping to book it for next spring, Rachel added, then looked directly at me for the first time since her announcement. Actually, Izzy, I was going to ask you about something related to that. I waited, curious to see how she would frame her request in front of our parents. The venue requires a pretty substantial deposit to hold the date, she continued carefully. We're still waiting for Marcus's bonus to come through, and my savings are tied up in my 401k. I was wondering if you might be able to help us out temporarily. How substantial? My father asked. 8,000, Rachel said quietly. My father nearly choked on his water. $8,000? Just for a deposit? It's a very exclusive venue, Rachel said defensively, and it includes a lot of services in the package. That's quite a bit of money, my mother said slowly. Which is why I thought maybe Isabella could help out, just until we get caught up financially, Rachel said, her voice taking on the pleading tone I'd heard so many times before. She's always been so generous with family stuff. All eyes turned to me. This was the moment where I was expected to play my usual role, the successful family member who solved financial problems without question or complaint. The sister who never said no, never asked for details, never expected anything in return except maybe a thank you text a few weeks later. Let me make sure I understand, I said slowly. You want me to pay an $8,000 deposit for a wedding I wasn't invited to celebrate the engagement I wasn't told about? The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's face went white, and my parents looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. That's not how it is, Rachel stammered. Then how is it? I asked, keeping my voice calm and level. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I'm good enough to fund your dreams, but not good enough to share them. Isabella, my mother said in her warning tone, the one she'd used when we were children and she wanted to prevent a fight before it started. No, Mom, I think this conversation is long overdue. I looked directly at Rachel. For 8 years, I've been the family ATM. College loans, career courses, apartment deposits, emergency car repairs, kitchen renovations, restaurant bailouts. I've written check after check without question because I thought that's what family did for each other. We are grateful, my father said quietly. Grateful enough to include me in major life events? Grateful enough to treat me like a family member instead of a bank account? Rachel's eyes were filled with tears, but they looked more like frustrated tears than sad ones. You're being really unfair right now. Am I? Because I'm trying to figure out when exactly I became someone who's useful but not welcome. When did I transition from sister to financial resource? You're twisting everything, Rachel said, her voice rising. It wasn't personal. The celebration was it was a specific group of people. What specific group? People who don't work for a living? People who inherited their money instead of earning it? People who fit some image you're trying to project? The words hit their target. Rachel's face crumpled, and I realized I'd finally said out loud what we'd all been dancing around for years. My success wasn't the right kind of success for her new life vision. I think we should all take a breath, Marcus said carefully, speaking for the first time since the conversation had shifted. No, I think we should finish this, I said, because I need to understand what I'm being asked to pay for. Am I funding a wedding I'll be invited to, or am I funding a wedding where I'll be systematically excluded again? The question hung in the air, and nobody seemed to have an answer. The dinner ended without resolution. Rachel had stormed out after claiming I was ruining everything and that she never expected this kind of treatment from family. My parents spent the remainder of the evening trying to convince me that I was overreacting, that family dynamics were complicated, and that maybe we could all work things out if everyone just took some time to cool down. I drove home to my Pearl District condo that night with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fog of obligation and guilt that had clouded my judgment for so long was finally lifting, and I could see the situation for what it truly was. I wasn't overreacting. I was finally reacting appropriately to years of being systematically used and marginalized. But before I made any definitive decisions about Rachel's venue deposit request, I needed more information. Not about family dynamics or emotional manipulation, but about the business opportunity that had been sitting in front of me all along. The next morning, I called my commercial real estate contact at First National Bank, a sharp woman named Patricia Williams, who had helped me secure financing for 3 of my property acquisitions. Patricia had been in Portland commercial real estate for 15 years and had connections throughout the industry that made her invaluable for research and deal-making. "Isabella, always a pleasure to hear from you," Patricia said when she picked up. "What can I do for you today?" "I need information about Pemberton Holdings and their Portland properties, specifically the Cascade Manor." "Ah, the wedding venue. Beautiful property, though I've heard Richard Pemberton is getting anxious to liquidate his Portland assets. Why the interest?" "Personal and potentially professional reasons. What do you know about their financial situation?" Patricia was quiet for a moment, which usually meant she was weighing how much information she could ethically share. "Off the record, they're overextended. Richard bought heavily into Seattle development projects last year, and the returns haven't materialized as quickly as he anticipated. Word is he needs to free up capital quickly, which means his Portland properties are likely available at below-market prices for cash buyers." "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" "If I had to guess, he'd probably want to close deals within the next 60 to 90 days. The manor has been his most expensive property to maintain. Historical preservation requirements, landscaping costs, insurance premiums. It's gorgeous, but it's not exactly a cash cow." "And if someone wanted to make an offer?" "For the right price and terms, I think he'd be very receptive. Are you thinking about expanding into hospitality real estate?" I hadn't been, but the idea was suddenly appealing in ways I hadn't anticipated. "Maybe. Can you get me Richard Pemberton's contact information and any financial details about the manor's operations?" "I can have that for you by this afternoon." "Isabella, this is a significant shift from your usual commercial office and retail focus. Are you sure you want to get into the events business?" "I'm sure I want to explore all my options." After hanging up with Patricia, I spent the morning researching the Cascade Manor's business model, customer reviews, and operational history. The venue was booked solid for the next 18 months, with wedding packages ranging from $15,000 for basic ceremonies to $50,000 for elaborate celebrations. Corporate events, anniversary parties, and charity galas filled their calendar year-round. Even accounting for operational costs, the manor was generating substantial revenue. More importantly, I discovered that Pemberton Holdings had been struggling to maintain the property's historical authenticity while meeting modern event requirements. Several recent reviews mentioned outdated sound systems, limited parking, and catering facilities that needed significant upgrades. The manor was profitable, but operating below its potential due to deferred maintenance and infrastructure limitations. By noon, I had a preliminary business plan forming in my mind. The Cascade Manor wasn't just a wedding venue. It was an undervalued commercial property in a prime location with established revenue streams and significant improvement potential. Whether or not I decided to help Rachel with her deposit, this represented exactly the kind of investment opportunity I'd been seeking to diversify my real estate portfolio. Patricia called back at 2 o'clock with Richard Pemberton's contact information and a treasure trove of financial data about the manor's operations. The numbers were even better than I'd hoped. Despite Pemberton's cash flow problems, the venue itself was generating consistent profits and had a waiting list of potential clients extending well into the following year. There's one more thing you should know, Patricia added. Richard is particularly motivated to sell quickly because he's facing some personal financial pressures. His ex-wife was awarded half of his assets in their divorce settlement last year, and he needs liquid capital to pay her out. The manor is his most valuable non-development asset. What kind of timeline is he looking at for the settlement? From what I understand, he has about 6 weeks to come up with the cash, or he'll have to liquidate other properties at fire sale prices. This information changed everything. Richard Pemberton wasn't just looking to sell, he was desperate to sell quickly. That desperation could translate into significant negotiating leverage for a cash buyer who could close quickly. I spent the rest of the afternoon creating financial projections for a potential manor acquisition. Even accounting for necessary improvements and renovations, the property could generate a substantial return on investment within 3 years. More immediately, owning the venue would give me complete control over its booking policies and operations, including the ability to cancel existing reservations if circumstances warranted it. That evening, Rachel called me. I let it ring 4 times before answering, wanting to make sure I was completely calm and focused before engaging with her again. "Izzy, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "I think there was a misunderstanding last night." "What kind of misunderstanding?" "You seem to think that you weren't included in the engagement celebration intentionally, but that's not what happened. It really was just a timing thing." I walked out onto my condo's balcony, looking out over the Portland skyline as the sun set behind the West Hills. "Rachel, I saw the guest list. You managed to coordinate schedules for over 20 people in 2 days, including people you barely know and some you actively dislike. The timing wasn't the issue. Okay, maybe I could have handled the communication better, but you have to understand, planning these kinds of events is really stressful. There are so many moving pieces, and sometimes people get overlooked." "Overlooked?" I repeated the word slowly. "Is that what you call it when you deliberately exclude your sister from one of the most important moments of your life?" "I didn't deliberately exclude you. You're being way too sensitive about this." "And yet here you are, calling me to ask for $8,000 while simultaneously telling me I'm being too sensitive about being excluded from your celebration." Silence stretched between us. I could hear traffic in the background on her end, suggesting she was calling from her car or somewhere outside. "Look," she finally said, "I know you're upset, and I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt, but we really need your help with the venue deposit. The wedding is important to both of us, and I thought you'd want to be part of making it happen." "Part of funding it, you mean?" "Part of the family," she said, but her tone suggested she knew how weak that sounded. "Here's what I don't understand, Rachel. If this wedding is so important, and if I'm such an important part of the family, why wasn't I involved in any of the engagement planning? Why didn't you call me when Marcus proposed? Why didn't you include me in the celebration? Why am I only hearing from you now when you need money?" "Because," she started, then stopped.
Because I knew you'd make it complicated. The honesty was startling, even though it confirmed what I'd suspected. Complicated how? You always have opinions about everything, about my choices, my friends, my lifestyle. I wanted one celebration where I didn't have to justify my decisions or explain myself. So you excluded me because you thought I'd disapprove of your choices? I excluded you because I wanted to enjoy my engagement without having to worry about anyone judging me. There it was. The real reason wasn't about timing or guest list logistics or miscommunication. Rachel had deliberately excluded me because she assumed I would disapprove of her decisions, and she didn't want to deal with potential conflict during her celebration. And now you want me to pay for a wedding where I'll presumably be equally judgmental and uncomfortable? The wedding will be different. It's a bigger event, more formal. You can just blend in with everyone else. Blend in. The phrase revealed everything about how Rachel saw me, as someone who needed to blend in rather than be celebrated as family. I need to think about this, I said finally. What's there to think about? It's $8,000. You spend more than that on a single commercial property inspection.
I need to think about whether I want to fund a wedding for someone who sees me as an obligation rather than family. Izzy, don't be dramatic. Of course you're family. Then prove it, I said, and hung up. That night, I drafted an email to Richard Pemberton expressing interest in purchasing the Cascade Manor. I didn't send it immediately. I wanted to sleep on the decision and make sure I was thinking clearly about the implications. But as I lay in bed looking out at the Portland city lights, I realized I'd already made my choice. If Rachel wanted to treat me like a business transaction rather than family, then I would approach this situation like a business transaction. And in business, I always came out ahead. I sent the email to Richard Pemberton at 6:47 a.m. the next morning, after a night of surprisingly peaceful sleep. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking control of a situation instead of simply reacting to other people's expectations and demands. The email was professional but direct. I was interested in purchasing the Cascade Manor as an investment property and could close quickly with cash if the terms were favorable. Richard called me personally less than 2 hours later. "Miss Martinez, I have to say, your timing is impeccable," he said, his voice carrying the slight desperation that Patricia had warned me about. "I've been hoping to find the right buyer for the manor, someone who would appreciate its unique qualities and potential." "I've done preliminary research on the property's financials and operational history," I replied, settling into my office chair with a legal pad and my laptop open. "The revenue streams are impressive, but I'm also aware that the property requires significant infrastructure investments to maximize its potential." "You're absolutely right. The sound system needs a complete overhaul, the kitchen facilities could be expanded, and the parking situation has been a persistent challenge for larger events. But those are all solvable problems for someone with the right vision and capital." "What kind of timeline are you working with for a sale?" There was a brief pause. "Ideally, I'd like to close within the next month. I'm consolidating my Portland assets to focus on development projects in Seattle, and quick closure would be advantageous for both parties." Translation: he was desperate and willing to negotiate aggressively on price in exchange for speed and certainty. Exactly what Patricia had predicted. "I'd need to conduct a full inspection and review all operational contracts before making a formal offer," I said, "but assuming everything checks out, I could close within 3 weeks." 3 weeks? The relief in his voice was unmistakable. "That would be perfect. When would you like to schedule the inspection?" "This afternoon, if possible. I prefer to move quickly on properties that interest me." 2 hours later, I was walking through the Cascade Manor with Richard Pemberton, a lean man in his early 60s who gestured enthusiastically while describing the property's history and potential. The venue was even more impressive in person than the photos had suggested. The main ballroom featured soaring ceilings with original crown molding, massive windows overlooking the river, and a parquet dance floor that had been lovingly maintained for nearly a century.
The catering kitchen serves our current needs adequately, Richard was saying as we toured the service areas, but there's space to expand into the adjacent storage room if a new owner wanted to accommodate larger events or more elaborate menus. I took notes on everything: electrical systems, plumbing, structural integrity, compliance with modern building codes. But I was also mentally cataloging the venue's booking system, cancellation policies, and contract terms. Information that would be crucial for what I was beginning to plan. "What's your typical booking timeline?" I asked, casually, as we walked through the bridal preparation suite. "Most weddings are booked 12 to 18 months in advance, though we occasionally accommodate shorter timeline requests for the right clients. Corporate events and private parties tend to book with less advance notice, maybe 3 to 6 months typically." "And cancellation policies?" "Standard industry terms. Deposits are non-refundable, but we're reasonable about rescheduling in cases of genuine emergency. We found that flexibility builds long-term relationships with event planners and repeat clients." "What about ownership changes? Do existing bookings transfer automatically to new owners?" Richard paused in the middle of explaining the outdoor ceremony space layout. "Well, legally, yes, but in practice, new owners usually honor existing contracts to maintain the venue's reputation." "Why do you ask?" "Just trying to understand all the operational obligations I'd be inheriting. I like to know exactly what I'm buying." "Of course, very smart approach. The current booking contracts are all standard, nothing unusual. Most clients are lovely to work with, though I will say that some of the wedding parties can be," he searched for the right word, "demanding. They have very specific visions and expect everything to be perfect." "I imagine the clientele is quite upscale." "Absolutely. The manor attracts Portland's most prominent families, successful professionals, people who appreciate quality and are willing to pay for it. The kind of clients who expect excellence and don't compromise on their special occasions." By the end of the tour, I had everything I needed to make an informed offer. The property was structurally sound, financially viable, and perfectly positioned for the kind of strategic intervention I was considering. More importantly, I'd confirmed that the venue's contracts and policies would give me significant leverage over existing bookings. That evening, I called Patricia to discuss pricing strategy and financing options. "Based on what you've told me about Pemberton's situation," I said, "I'm thinking of offering 20% below the property's assessed value, with a 2-week inspection period and guaranteed cash closing." "That's aggressive, but given his timeline pressures, it might work. What's your maximum budget if he counters?"
I'm prepared to go up to 15% below the assessed value, but not higher. If he rejects that, I'll walk away. There are other investment opportunities that don't require emotional decision-making. Emotional decision-making? I realized I'd revealed more than I intended. Let's just say this property has some personal significance beyond the financial projections. Isabella, please tell me you're not making a major real estate purchase for personal reasons. That's how people lose money. I'm making a smart business decision that happens to solve a personal problem. The property is genuinely undervalued, the revenue streams are solid, and the improvement potential is significant. Everything else is just a bonus. Patricia was quiet for a moment. What kind of personal problem? The kind that gets resolved when you own the venue someone else needs for their perfect wedding. Oh my God, Isabella, are you buying this place to mess with someone's wedding? I'm buying this place because it's a good investment. What I do with the operational decisions afterward is just sound business management. This is either brilliant or completely insane. In my experience, the best business decisions usually seem like both. I submitted my offer the next morning, $1.8 million for a property assessed at $2.3 million, with a 14-day inspection period and guaranteed cash closing. Richard Pemberton called me within 3 hours to accept. "Miss Martinez, you have yourself a deal," he said, his voice practically giddy with relief. "When can we schedule the contract signing?" "My attorney will have the paperwork ready by tomorrow afternoon. We can close by the end of next week if the inspection doesn't reveal any major issues." Perfect. Absolutely perfect. I have to say, this is exactly the kind of smooth transaction I was hoping for.
I'm glad we could find terms that work for both parties. After hanging up, I sat in my office looking out at the Portland skyline and allowing myself a moment of satisfaction. In less than 48 hours, I'd identified an opportunity, conducted due diligence, negotiated a purchase, and secured a deal that would give me complete control over Rachel's dream wedding venue. But ownership was only the first step. The real strategy would unfold over the next 2 weeks, while Rachel continued planning her perfect celebration, completely unaware that her funding source had just become her venue owner. I pulled up Rachel's contact information and composed a text message. Hey Rachel, I've been thinking about our conversation and I've decided I want to help with the wedding venue. Let's meet for coffee tomorrow to discuss the details. There are a few things we should talk about regarding the deposit and timeline. I read the message twice before sending it. Technically, every word was true. I did want to help with the wedding venue situation, just not in the way Rachel was expecting. And there definitely were things we needed to discuss about deposits and timelines. Her response came back within minutes. OMG, yes! Thank you so much, Izzy. I knew you'd come through for us. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. at Blue Star Cafe, I can't wait to tell you all about our wedding plans. I stared at the enthusiasm in her message, the exclamation points, and the assumption that I'd simply fallen back into my familiar role as family ATM. The complete absence of any acknowledgement about our previous conversation or her admission that she'd excluded me intentionally. See you at 2 p.m., I replied simply. Over the next week, while the property inspection and legal paperwork proceeded smoothly, I met with Rachel twice more to discuss wedding details. She showed me color schemes, menu options, floral arrangements, and seating charts with the kind of excited energy that suggested she'd completely forgotten our family dinner confrontation. During our second coffee meeting, she mentioned that she'd already put down a deposit to hold the date at the Cascade Manor. Wait, I said, setting down my latte carefully. You already paid the deposit? Well, not the full deposit. I put down $1,000 to hold the date while we figured out the rest of the financing. The remaining $7,000 is due next Friday, or we lose the reservation. And you're sure this is the venue you want? Absolutely positive. It's perfect, Isabella. Everything about it is exactly what I dreamed of for my wedding. The ballroom, the gardens, the view of the river. It's like something out of a fairy tale. It sounds beautiful, I said. You should come see it with me. We could do a final walkthrough together before we pay the remaining deposit. I'd love to get your opinion on some of the setup options. The irony was almost too perfect. Rachel wanted me to tour the venue I now owned to give my opinion on setup options for the wedding I still hadn't been asked to. That's a great idea, I said. Let's schedule that for early next week, after the paperwork is finalized. Perfect. This is going to be the most amazing wedding, Isabella. I can't thank you enough for making it possible. I smiled and nodded, wondering how long it would take her to realize that making it possible and making it happen were two entirely different things. The property closing took place on a Thursday morning in downtown Portland, in a sterile conference room at Thompson & Associates law firm. Richard Pemberton arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of nervous energy that comes with financial desperation finally meeting its solution. His relief was palpable as he shook my hand and thanked me repeatedly for making the transaction so smooth and professional.
I have to admit, he said as we waited for the attorneys to finalize the paperwork, I was worried I'd have to sell to one of those corporate hospitality chains. They would have gutted the place, turned it into some generic event factory. You strike me as someone who appreciates the Manor's unique character. I definitely have specific plans for preserving what makes the venue special, I replied, which was completely true, though probably not in the way he was imagining. The closing itself took less than 90 minutes. I signed document after document, transferring ownership, insurance policies, existing vendor contracts, and operational licenses. With each signature, I became more legally entitled to make decisions about the Cascade Manor's bookings, policies, and future operations. The most important document was the comprehensive list of existing reservations, complete with contact information, deposit amounts, and contractual obligations.
I scanned through the entries until I found what I was looking for. Coleman Stewart Wedding, April 15th, 2024. Primary contact, Rachel Coleman. Deposit, $1,000. Balance due, $7,000 by March 3rd, 2024. Today was March 1st. Miss Martinez, the attorney said as he handed me the final deed, congratulations. You are now the owner of one of Portland's most prestigious event venues. Thank you. I'm looking forward to implementing some operational improvements. After Richard left, practically skipping with relief, I stayed behind to discuss transition procedures with the attorney and the venue's existing event coordinator, a sophisticated woman named Caroline Murphy, who had been managing bookings and client relationships for the past 6 years. I want to assure you that I have no immediate plans to disrupt ongoing operations, I told Caroline as we reviewed the reservation calendar. Most existing bookings will proceed as scheduled. Most? Caroline asked, clearly attuned to the significance of that word choice. There may be some special circumstances that require individual evaluation. I'll need you to compile detailed files for all upcoming events, client communications, specific requests, payment histories, any issues or concerns. Of course. Is there anything in particular I should be looking for? Just complete documentation. I want to understand exactly what we've committed to and whether all parties are meeting their contractual obligations. Caroline nodded professionally, though I could see her curiosity about my emphasis on contractual obligations. I'll have those files ready by tomorrow morning. That afternoon, I drove to the Cascade Manor alone, using my new set of keys to unlock the front entrance. Walking through the venue as its owner felt surreal. The same ballroom Rachel had described as perfect and like something out of a fairy tale was now mine to control completely. I spent 2 hours exploring every room, examining the sound systems that would need upgrading, visualizing the kitchen expansion possibilities, and mentally cataloging all the operational improvements that would maximize the property's potential. But I also spent time in the main ballroom, imagining Rachel's wedding reception, her carefully curated guest list celebrating in a space she'd never realize I controlled. The irony was almost artistic. She had excluded me from her engagement celebration because I didn't fit the vibe of her sophisticated social circle. Now the venue for her dream wedding was owned by the same person she deemed unworthy of inclusion in her perfect day. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Izzy, tomorrow is the deadline for the final venue deposit. Can you meet me at the bank at 10 a.m. to transfer the money? I want to get this handled early so I don't stress about it all day. Heart. I read the message twice, noting her assumption that I would simply show up at the bank and wire $7,000 without further discussion. No mention of our previous conversations about inclusion or family dynamics, no acknowledgement that she was asking for a substantial amount of money while still treating me as someone who needed to blend in at her wedding. I'll meet you at the venue instead, I replied. 10:30, we should review the contract details before finalizing payment. The venue? Why there? The deposit gets paid to the venue management company, not at the actual location. Trust me, it'll be more efficient this way. See you tomorrow. I spent that evening preparing for what would either be the most satisfying conversation of my life or a complete disaster that would permanently destroy my relationship with my family. Probably both. The next morning, I arrived at the Cascade Manor 30 minutes early and met with Caroline to review the Coleman Stewart wedding file one final time. Everything was exactly as I'd expected. Rachel had been demanding and specific about every detail, had requested several contract modifications that increased costs, and was now approaching the payment deadline without having secured financing.
The client has been challenging, Caroline admitted diplomatically. Very particular about floral placement, lighting adjustments, menu modifications. She's called at least 15 times in the past month with additional requests. And payment history? The initial deposit was paid on time, but she's asked twice about extending the deadline for the final payment. I told her that our policy doesn't allow extensions, but she seemed confident she'd secure funding. She mentioned having family help with financing.
Yes, she's referenced a family member several times as her backup plan. I got the impression this person has helped her financially before. I nodded, understanding the dynamic perfectly. Rachel had been using me as her financial safety net for so long that she couldn't conceive of a scenario where I wouldn't eventually come through with the money. At exactly 10:30, Rachel's car pulled into the Manor's circular driveway. She stepped out wearing a designer dress I'd never seen before and carrying the kind of oversized handbag that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her entire appearance projected success and sophistication, the image she'd been carefully crafting for her new social circle. She walked up to the front entrance where I was waiting and gave me a quick hug that felt more like a social greeting than familial affection. "This place is incredible, right?" she said, gesturing toward the building. "I can't wait for you to see the ballroom. It's going to be absolutely perfect for the reception." "I'm sure it will be beautiful," I said, unlocking the front door with my keys. Rachel paused. "How do you have keys?" "Caroline gave them to me, so we could review the space privately. She thought it would be helpful for making the final payment decision." "Oh, okay, that makes sense." We walked through the entrance hall and into the main ballroom, Rachel chattering excitedly about centerpiece placement, dance floor arrangements, and the string quartet she'd hired for the ceremony. Her enthusiasm was genuine and infectious. This really was her dream wedding venue, and she'd put considerable thought into every detail. "So the payment," I said, once her initial excitement settled, $7,000, correct? "Right, I know it's a lot, but this place is worth every penny, and like I said, Marcus and I will pay you back after the honeymoon." "Before I transfer the money, I want to make sure I understand exactly what I'm paying for." Rachel looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I mean, am I paying for a wedding I'm invited to attend, or am I paying for a wedding where I'll need to blend in with people who don't consider me part of your real family?" Her face flushed. "Izzy, we talked about this. Of course you're invited to the wedding." "Are we talking about a real invitation, or are we talking about an obligation invitation because I'm funding it?" "Why are you making this so complicated? You're my sister. Of course I want you at my wedding." "Then why wasn't I at your engagement celebration? Why wasn't I told about the proposal? Why am I only hearing from you when you need money?" Rachel shifted uncomfortably, her designer heels clicking against the ballroom's hardwood floor. "Look, I know I could have handled some things better, but that doesn't change the fact that I love you and want you to be part of my wedding day." "Part of funding it, you mean?" "Part of everything," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I walked over to one of the tall windows over the river, taking in the view that Rachel had described as perfect. She was right, it was stunning. The kind of backdrop that would create beautiful photographs and lasting memories for the right celebration. "You know what, Rachel? You're absolutely right. This venue is perfect for your wedding." Relief flooded her face. "So you'll help with the deposit?" "I'll do more than help with the deposit," I said, turning to face her. "I'll take care of everything." "Really? Oh my God, thank you so much. I knew you'd come through for us. You always do." "Yes," I said quietly. "I always do." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder containing the deed to the Cascade Manor, along with the comprehensive booking contract that included her wedding reservation. "Rachel, I need to tell you something about this venue." "What about it?" "I own it." She stared at me blankly. "What do you mean you own it?" "I mean, I purchased the Cascade Manor 5 days ago. I am now the legal owner of your dream wedding venue." The color drained from her face. "That's not possible." I handed her the deed. "It's not only possible, it's done." She took the document with shaking hands, scanning the legal language that transferred ownership of the property to Isabella Martinez. "I don't understand. Why would you buy this place?" "Because it's a good investment, and because I wanted to have complete control over the booking policies." "What does that mean?" I smiled, feeling the satisfaction of a plan finally coming together. "It means we need to discuss whether your reservation is going to be honored." Rachel stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom, clutching the property deed like it might spontaneously combust in her hands. The silence stretched between us for nearly 30 seconds before she finally found her voice. "This is a joke, right?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You're trying to scare me or teach me some kind of lesson?" "I'm completely serious. I purchased this property through a private sale with the previous owner. The transaction closed yesterday morning." But, but why?" Her voice was rising now, confusion mixing with panic. "Why would you buy a wedding venue? You don't even work in hospitality." "I bought it because it's an excellent investment opportunity. The previous owner was highly motivated to sell quickly, and I was able to acquire the property significantly below market value." Rachel's face cycled through several emotions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally something that looked like genuine fear. "What does this mean for my wedding?" "That depends entirely on you." "What do you mean it depends on me? I have a contract. I put down a deposit." I walked over to one of the elegant French doors that led to the garden terrace, running my finger along the original brass handle that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. "You do have a contract. You also have an outstanding balance of $7,000 that's due today, or your reservation gets canceled." "But you can waive that. You own the place now." "I could waive it, but I'm a businesswoman, Rachel. I don't make decisions based on sentiment. I make them based on value exchange." She stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Value exchange? Isabella, I'm your sister." "Are you?" I turned to face her directly. "Because sisters typically include each other in major life celebrations. Sisters don't usually exclude family members from engagement parties because they don't fit the aesthetic. Sisters don't treat each other like personal ATM while simultaneously looking down on them." "I never looked down on you. You told me I didn't fit the vibe of your engagement celebration. You said I'd make people uncomfortable. You literally said I don't belong in sophisticated settings." Rachel's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. "I was stressed about planning, and I said things I didn't mean." "No, Rachel, you said exactly what you meant. The problem is that you still needed my money, so you had to pretend those things weren't true." "That's not fair. You're twisting everything." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the voice memo I'd recorded during our family dinner confrontation. "Would you like me to play back exactly what you said about me not belonging with your corporate friends?" Her face went pale. "You recorded our conversation?" "I recorded my own realizations about how my family really sees me. And those realizations helped me understand that I needed to start making business decisions instead of emotional ones." "So what, you bought my wedding venue out of spite?" "I bought an undervalued commercial property that happened to be your wedding venue. What I do with the operational decisions is separate business consideration." Rachel began pacing around the ballroom, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. "This is insane. You can't just hold my wedding hostage because your feelings were hurt." "I'm not holding anything hostage. I'm offering you a business proposition." "What kind of business proposition?" "Your reservation remains valid, and your event proceeds as planned if you can demonstrate that you actually value me as family rather than just as a funding source." "I do value you as family." "Prove it." "How?" I walked over to the spot where Rachel had planned to have her receiving line, imagining the flow of guests offering congratulations and posing for photographs. "First, you acknowledge publicly that I paid for your venue. Not that I helped out or contributed, but that I funded this location for your wedding." "Okay, fine, I can do that." "Second, you apologize to our parents for excluding me from your engagement celebration, and you explain why that exclusion was wrong." Rachel's expression darkened. "You want me to grovel in front of mom and dad?" "I want you to take responsibility for your choices, instead of pretending they were accidents or misunderstandings." "What else?" "Third, you write personal apology notes to every person who was invited to your engagement celebration, explaining that you made a mistake by not including your sister, and that family support means more than social appearances." "That's humiliating." "Is it more humiliating than spending years treating your sister like an ATM while pretending she's not good enough for your social circle?" Rachel stopped pacing and stared at me. "You're really going to make me do all that just to have my wedding here?" "I'm not making you do anything. I'm offering you a choice." You can meet those conditions and have your dream wedding, or you can find another venue with 5 weeks' notice.
5 weeks? Do you have any idea how impossible it is to book a decent venue with 5 weeks' notice? About as impossible as it was for you to include your sister in your engagement celebration with 2 days' notice. Rachel's face crumpled, and for the first time in our conversation, she looked genuinely vulnerable instead of angry or manipulative. Isabella, please, this venue is perfect. Everything about my wedding is planned around this space. The flowers, the music, the photography, everything. I understand how important this is to you. Then let me have it. You've made your point. I get it, okay? I should have included you. I should have been more grateful. I'll do better. Words are easy, Rachel. I need to see actions that demonstrate you actually understand what you did wrong. Fine, I'll apologize to everyone. I'll tell them I was wrong to exclude you. Just please don't cancel my wedding. And you'll acknowledge that I paid for the venue? Yes. And you'll explain to our parents why excluding me was wrong, not just that it was a mistake. She hesitated. What's the difference? A mistake implies it was accidental. Wrong implies it was a deliberate choice that hurts someone you claim to care about. Fine, I'll say it was wrong. And the apology notes to your engagement celebration guests? Rachel's hands were shaking now. That's really going to damage some important relationships for me. More important than your relationship with your sister? That's not what I meant, isn't it? Because those relationships are exactly why you excluded me in the first place. You valued their opinions more than my feelings. Okay, I'll write the notes, I'll do all of it. Just please let me have my wedding here. I studied her face, trying to determine whether her agreement came from genuine understanding or just desperate expediency. There's one more condition. What now? You write me a check for $7,000 as payment for the venue rental. But I thought, if you own it, I own it, which means I decide what to charge. And I'm charging you exactly what you were prepared to pay when you thought someone else owned it. That doesn't make sense. If you want me to pay anyway, why did you buy the place? Because now the money comes to me instead of to someone who doesn't know how you treat family. And because I wanted you to understand that your actions have consequences. Rachel pulled out her phone and started frantically typing. I need to call Marcus. I need to figure out how we're going to get $7,000 by today. The same way you were going to get it yesterday, by asking me. She looked up from her phone, confusion replacing panic. You mean you'll still loan us the money? I mean you're going to pay me $7,000 for venue rental, and I'm going to loan you $7,000 for venue rental. It's the same transaction you wanted yesterday, just with full transparency about who benefits. That's exactly the same outcome. Financially, yes. Emotionally, it's completely different. Because now you're paying your sister for her wedding venue instead of taking money from your sister while excluding her from your life. Rachel stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to process the distinction I was making. You bought an entire wedding venue just to prove a point about family dynamics? I bought an undervalued investment property that gives me leverage to address family dynamics. The point was always secondary to the business opportunity. I don't understand you anymore. You never understood me, Rachel. You just understood that I was useful when you needed money. Her phone buzzed with what was probably a text from Marcus, asking about the deposit situation. She glanced at it but didn't respond. So, if I agree to all your conditions, she said slowly, will my wedding happen here as planned? Your wedding happens here as planned, you pay market rate for the venue rental, and you start treating me like family instead of like a financial resource. And if I don't agree, then you have 5 weeks to find a new venue, and I have a booking cancellation that opens up one of the busiest wedding dates of the year for a client who will pay full price without demanding special treatment. Rachel closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them, something had shifted in her expression. Not acceptance exactly, but recognition of reality. All right, she said quietly. I'll meet your conditions. All of them? All of them. Starting today?
starting right now. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. Then let's begin with your acknowledgement that you deliberately excluded me from your engagement celebration because you didn't think I was sophisticated enough for your guest list. You want me to say that on recording? I want you to be honest about what happened for the first time since this whole situation started. Rachel looked around the ballroom one more time at the space where she'd planned to have her perfect wedding, surrounded by her carefully curated guest list, celebrating the image she'd worked so hard to create. Then she looked directly into my phone camera and began to speak. "My name is Rachel Coleman," she began, her voice shaky but audible in the acoustically perfect ballroom. "I deliberately excluded my sister Isabella from my engagement celebration because I was embarrassed about her profession and didn't think she would fit in with my friends and colleagues. I prioritized appearances over family, and I treated someone who has supported me financially for years like she wasn't worthy of being included in important moments of my life." She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "I was wrong to exclude her. I was wrong to take her money while looking down on her success, and I was wrong to assume she would always be available to solve my problems without expecting to be treated like family in return." I stopped the recording and looked at her. For the first time since I'd known her as an adult, Rachel looked genuinely remorseful rather than just sorry she'd been caught. "That's a good start," I said. "Now let's discuss the logistics of your wedding." Over the next 2 hours, we went through every detail of her event with Caroline Murphy, who had arrived to facilitate the transition meeting. Rachel's demeanor was completely different now. She was polite, respectful, and actually listened when Caroline offered suggestions instead of demanding modifications. "The floral arrangements you specified will work beautifully with the ballroom's natural lighting," Caroline was saying as she showed Rachel the layout options on her tablet. "We've hosted similar color schemes before, and the photographs always turn out stunning." "That sounds perfect," Rachel replied. "I trust your professional judgment." Caroline looked surprised. According to her notes, Rachel had questioned and modified nearly every professional recommendation during previous planning sessions. But power dynamics have a way of clarifying priorities, and Rachel clearly understood that her demanding attitude was no longer appropriate now that her sister controlled every aspect of the venue. "The catering timeline should work smoothly, though I do want to confirm the final headcount for ordering purposes." 147 guests, Rachel said, then looked at me, "Including my sister and a +1 if she'd like to bring someone. I'll bring a date, a friend who runs a successful law practice downtown, someone who definitely fits the sophisticated vibe you were concerned about." Rachel winced but nodded. "Of course, I'd love to meet them." After Caroline left to update the catering orders and timeline, Rachel and I sat alone in the ballroom where she'd planned to celebrate the most important day of her life. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows created exactly the romantic atmosphere she'd described in her initial planning notes. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Sure." "When did you decide to buy this place? Was it always about the wedding, or did you really see it as an investment opportunity first?" I considered the question carefully. "Both. I'd been tracking Pemberton Holdings for months because I was looking to diversify into hospitality real estate. But when you asked for venue money while excluding me from your engagement celebration, I realized this was the perfect intersection of business opportunity and personal resolution." "So you weren't just being vindictive?" "I was being strategic. Vindictive would have been simply refusing to help and watching your plans fall apart. Strategic was positioning myself to have control over the outcome while making a profitable investment." Rachel was quiet for several minutes, looking around the space that would host her wedding in 5 weeks. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows created exactly the romantic atmosphere she'd described in her initial planning notes. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Sure." "When did you decide to buy this place? Was it always about the wedding, or did you really see it as an investment opportunity first?" I considered the question carefully. "Both. I'd been tracking Pemberton Holdings for months because I was looking to diversify into hospitality real estate. But when you asked for venue money while excluding me from your engagement celebration, I realized this was the perfect intersection of business opportunity and personal resolution." "So you weren't just being vindictive?" "I was being strategic. Vindictive would have been simply refusing to help and watching your plans fall apart. Strategic was positioning myself to have control over the outcome while making a profitable investment. Rachel was quiet for several minutes, looking around the space that would host her wedding in 5 weeks. "I owe you more than an apology," she finally said. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've spent years treating you like you were less successful than me, when the truth is, you've built something incredible. You own commercial properties, you employ people, you saw an opportunity and moved on it fast enough to completely change the power dynamic of our relationship. That's not just successful, that's impressive." It was the first time Rachel had ever acknowledged my professional achievements without qualifiers or dismissive comments. "I appreciate you saying that. I'm serious. I was so focused on the kind of success that looks good on social media that I completely missed the kind of success that actually matters. You've been financially independent since you were 25. You've built a business that generates enough profit for you to make major real estate purchases without borrowing money, and you did it all without needing anyone else's approval or support. And yet you thought I wouldn't fit in with your corporate friends? Because I'm an idiot who confused job titles with actual achievement. Most of my friends are drowning in student loans and credit card debt, but they have fancy titles and work in air-conditioned offices, so I thought that made them more successful than someone who owns multiple properties and employs a dozen people. The admission was more honest than anything Rachel had said to me in years. What changed your perspective? Watching you negotiate with Caroline, seeing how you handled the property purchase, realizing that you had enough liquid capital to buy an entire wedding venue just to make a point, it forced me to confront how wrong I've been about measuring success. And about measuring family?
Especially about measuring family. She turned to face me directly. "Isabella, I don't just want you at my wedding because you're paying for the venue. I want you there because you're my sister, and I've been a terrible sister to you." "What happens after the wedding?" I asked. "Do we go back to the old dynamic where you only call when you need money?" "No, I want to change that pattern completely. I want to start acting like someone who values family relationships more than financial convenience. That's going to require some significant adjustments to how you approach problems." "I know, and I'm prepared to make those adjustments." 3 weeks later, I received a handwritten letter from Rachel along with a check for $7,000. The letter contained her formal apology for years of taking advantage of my generosity, her acknowledgement that she'd treated me as a financial resource rather than family, and her commitment to building a genuine sisterly relationship based on mutual respect. The check was payment for the venue rental, money she and Marcus had saved by cutting their honeymoon budget and selling some wedding gifts they'd received early. It represented the first time Rachel had prioritized paying me back over her own desires. She also sent me copies of the apology notes she'd written to every guest from her engagement celebration. The notes were thoughtful, specific, and genuinely embarrassing, exactly what I'd required. Several recipients had responded with support for her honesty and questions about me, which led to Rachel enthusiastically describing my real estate business and professional achievements. The wedding itself was beautiful. Rachel looked stunning, Marcus was clearly devoted to her, and the venue provided exactly the elegant backdrop she'd envisioned. But more importantly, I felt welcomed rather than tolerated. Rachel introduced me to her friends as my incredibly successful sister who owns several commercial properties, and she made sure I was included in family photos, toasts, and conversations. During her reception speech, Rachel publicly thanked me for making this perfect venue possible through your generosity and business expertise. It was the first time she'd ever acknowledged both my financial support and my professional skills in front of other people. 6 months after the wedding, our relationship had transformed completely. Rachel called me for advice rather than money, included me in social events without prompting, and regularly brought up my business achievements when talking to her friends. She'd learned to see my success as something to be proud of rather than embarrassed about. More importantly, she'd learned that family relationships require emotional investment, not just financial convenience. The Cascade Manor became one of my most profitable properties. I invested in the sound system upgrades, expanded the catering facilities, and improved the parking situation. Within a year, I was booking events at premium rates and had a waiting list extending 18 months out. But the best return on investment wasn't financial.
It was finally having a sister who treated me like family instead of like an ATM. Rachel never asked me for money again, not because she didn't occasionally need help, but because she'd learned to solve her own problems first and ask for advice rather than funding. When she did face a legitimate emergency 2 years later, she approached me as a sister seeking support from family, not as a debtor expecting another bailout. The dynamic shift was permanent because the lesson was clear. Respect has to be mutual, support has to be reciprocal, and family relationships can't survive when one person is valued only for their utility. The Cascade Manor became one of my most profitable properties. I invested in the sound system upgrades, expanded the catering facilities, and improved the parking situation. Within a year, I was booking events at premium rates and had a waiting list extending 18 months out. But the best return on investment wasn't financial. It was finally having a sister who treated me like family instead of like an ATM. Rachel never asked me for money again, not because she didn't occasionally need help, but because she'd learned to solve her own problems first and ask for advice rather than funding. When she did face a legitimate emergency 2 years later, she approached me as a sister seeking support from family, not as a debtor expecting another bailout. The dynamic shift was permanent because the lesson was clear. Respect has to be mutual, support has to be reciprocal, and family relationships can't survive when one person is valued only for their utility. The Cascade Manor became one of my most profitable properties. I invested in the sound system upgrades, expanded the catering facilities, and improved the parking situation. Within a year, I was booking events at premium rates and had a waiting list extending 18 months out. But the best return on investment wasn't financial. It was finally having a sister who treated me like family instead of like an ATM. Rachel never asked me for money again, not because she didn't occasionally need help, but because she'd learned to solve her own problems first and ask for advice rather than funding. When she did face a legitimate emergency 2 years later, she approached me as a sister seeking support from family, not as a debtor expecting another bailout. The dynamic shift was permanent because the lesson was clear. Respect has to be mutual, support has to be reciprocal, and family relationships can't survive when one person is valued only for their utility. Sometimes, the best way to teach people how to treat you is to change the rules of the game entirely. And sometimes, the most effective way to solve a family problem is to approach it like a business transaction until family members learn to act like family. I still own the Cascade Manor. It's booked for Rachel's friends' weddings regularly now, and every event reminds me that strategic thinking and emotional boundaries aren't mutually exclusive. They're actually complementary tools for building relationships based on genuine respect rather than convenient exploitation. And every time I sign a venue contract, I remember that owning the game board is always better than just hoping the other players will follow the rules. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.